5 minutes for others to get in. And yeah, then we will begin. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Rajes. I will be moderating today's lecture. I want to give 1 more minute for some more people to join, and your speaker has been put on mute. So if you would have any questions along the line, please state them in the chat box below, and your questions will be answered after the class is done. Thank you for joining today's lecture, and I look forward to a very beautiful lecture. So let's just give 1 more minute, and then we'll see how this goes. Okay, so on today's lecture, it's set to be very, very impactful and educative. Like I said, I am the moderator, and I am pleased to have you all here on today's lecture, the Electoral College. Today's lecture is about the legislative, and today our host is Nella Edem Ewa. A little introduction about our host. She is from Cross River, sectional policy. She is a cross-sectional policy and legal professional with vast experience in various fields, including policy advocacy, litigation and commercial law, communications, and the non-governmental sector. She is the social advisor on policy and communications to the senator representing Cross River South Senatorial District and a partner at the Lex Global Partners LP. She has been the communication officer at a non-governmental organization that successfully initiated several community development programs and an associate at a top-tier Nigerian litigation and commercial law firm. She believes that access to quality health and lifelong education, firm work opportunities, and inclusive, as well as protective institutions would contribute immensely to create the critical mass that will drive Nigerians to change. She is currently the Deputy Executive Director of the Electoral College of Nigeria and an active member of Rotary International, a fellow of the 2021 Elect Her Future Lawmakers Program inaugural cohort. Nella holds an LLB with honors in law from the University of Edinburgh, UK, and has been called to the Nigerian bar. She was an aspirant and runner-up for Cross River House of Assembly. Cross River State of House of Assembly, I beg your pardon. Calabar South Constituency, 1 seat in the party primaries of the just concluded election. We would like to welcome Ms. Nella as our host for today, and we look forward to having a very educative and beautiful interaction and lecture today. With a show of hands, a raise of hands, please welcome Nella to today's class.
Hello? Anita, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I keep getting thrown in and out, so I didn't hear anything Anita said, so I'm not sure if I'm.
Okay, I think let's give her a little bit of time so she can.
Hello?
But while we wait for her, can we just, show her a welcome note, maybe stating down in our chat box, welcoming her on today's lecture.
Hello, Anita, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Nella. I can hear you.
Hello?
I can hear you, Nella. I can hear you.
Hi.
You are
Hi.
welcome.
Thank you. I keep getting thrown in and out. It's raining here, so I think the network is really, really, really bad. So I might need, like, if you can't hear me, just let me know. I'm trying to see if I can switch my data provider. I don't know. It's been good all day, but trust. If you just give me 1 second, let me try to change. Maybe let me go to another one because I keep getting thrown in and out.
We're just having a little glitch in the network. So please, if you can hear me, I would assume that my network is clear. With the show of hand, please indicate that you can hear me. However, while we wait for Nella, please indicate if you can hear me. Okay, perfect. Now that that's clear, please, while we wait for Nella, just exercise a little bit patience, a little bit, that I hope that the network gets better. Please exercise a little bit of patience. And I appreciate your patience.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hi.
Perfect.
Crazy. I think I've switched data providers, so hopefully Etisalat won't fail me on 9 Mobile now. So yeah, thank you. I didn't hear the beginning, but thank you for the introduction, and I think we'll just get into it because of time. So, well, welcome everyone to this class. This is the class on the legislative arm of government. My name is Nella Ndemewa, and I believe the notes were sent earlier. So I'll just sort of a brief caveat. The slides are quite different from the notes that were sent earlier. The notes are more content heavy, with the theory of the basic things relating to the legislative arm of government, like legislation and this and that. The similar stuff is also in the slides, but it's more, I would like to say, thought-provoking and slightly different. So if, at the end of the class, you need these slides as well, they will be provided. I just thought I should mention that, so there's no confusion as to the disparity. So, the legislative arm of government. Briefly, we're going to go through, the Nigerian legislature, the different tiers, and the composition, different things within that arm of government. Then we'll also discuss the functions. Then we'll discuss this concept called the boring revolution and relate that to our own context of the Nigerian legislature. And then as a way of thinking of the next steps, just given where we are as a society, we will use our imagination to sort of chart or discuss the way forward. And next, so the Nigerian legislature. To the next slide. So there's this quote I always use. I say, powerful people cannot afford to educate the people that they oppress, because once you are truly educated, you will not ask for power, you will simply take it. This is by an American historian, John Clark, and I think it is quite true. It's as true as it's stated. If in any sphere, forget politics, forget government, just in general, if someone has power over a certain way of living or generating resources or improving their well-being, the human instincts, it may seem pessimistic, but I believe humans are innately self-seeking about survival, and it's just the way we are conditioned. We can overcome that, but I think if we understand that innate sense of survival, we will understand that we need to find the answers ourselves. We need to educate ourselves. If we are unhappy with the way our government works, we should understand why for ourselves. Even in religion, it's the same thing. You don't just go into a church and absorb everything. You sometimes think about it too, because you also need to understand, or a mosque, or you need to understand for yourself what you're believing or what you're you're having to abide by, for lack of a better word. So I think this is a great poser to just enter the class with. So within the legislative arm of government, you have 3 tiers. You have the National Assembly, which is the apex, legislative house or houses, because there are 2 chambers. And under that, you have the Senate and the House of Representatives, which we will discuss as we go forward. And then you have the state level, you have the state houses of assembly. So each state has a house except the FCT, because it's a federal capital territory. So it's governed by National Assembly, or is legislated over by National Assembly rather. And then you have the 3rd tier, which is the local government legislative councils. I believe you've taken that topic already. So, but for this class, where obviously it's the legislative arm of government, but we'll specifically handle the federal and state level and talk legislature in general. Now, as I said, there are 2 houses in the National Assembly. That's the federal legislative arm. You have the Senate, which is considered the upper chamber or the red chamber, and we have the House of Reps, which is, or representatives, which is called the green chamber or the lower chamber. And then, just as an addition, you have, so we can do this together, we have the State House of Assemblies, so the 36 State House of Assemblies, which I guess is, we will consider it's separate from the national, but in terms of arrangement or composition, and you can compare the 3. So the Senate has 3 senators per state, and then 1 for the FCT, again, because the Federal Capital Territory is a capital territory, but for the sake of representation, they have a senator. Then the House of Representatives has 360 members, representing the 360 constituencies across Nigeria, but in varying numbers per state based on representation. And then the State House of Assembly, you have 3 or 4 times the number of seats in the House of Representatives. So for example, I'll use my state. I'm from Cross River State. States are different. We have 8 House of Representative seats or constituencies, 18 local governments, so 2 local governments per seat, except 1 which has 3. And then at the state level, we have 25 State House of Assembly members representing the various council wards and various state constituencies rather. And therefore there are 25 at the state and there are 8 at the national House of Reps. So you see it's about 4 times the number. And this is similar in every state, but in varying degrees. Then at the Senate, you have the president and deputy Senate. Sorry about the noise. Someone's car is going off. And at the House of Reps, you have the speaker and deputy speaker. These are the leaders of the houses. And then at the state level, you also have a speaker and deputy speaker. Please let me know if you can't hear me or if I need to put on earphones or something. But I think so far I'm okay. No one's complained yet. Yes, then thank you. At the Senate, it's basically about equal representation, which is why each state has 3 senators. We're not speaking about the FCT because, as we have explained, each state has 3 senators, regardless of the size, regardless of the population. That's not the issue there. This house is supposed to signify that every state is equal under Constitution and in Nigeria. So as far as legislation goes, every state has 3 senators who can speak and advocate on their behalf. At the Federal House of Representatives, representation is slightly different there. It's now more proportionate and about direct representation. So now this is in terms of, now here you consider the population, the size, and based on those adjustments, the federal constituencies have been created to properly represent the varying constituencies within the state. So some states have more, some have less. Then at the state level, it's also for there to be a reflection of nearly equal population to truly reflect a proper representation of every constituency within that state. So similar to the House of Reps. So if we're to compare which of the chambers at the National Assembly is like a state House of Assembly, we would say it's the House of Representatives, because it's more about proportionate representation and equal, it's more about the population and the people, as opposed to the fact that the state itself they're all equal, because that's now direct representation. As we said, FCT is not a state, so that explains why it's slightly different representation than. Please, the next slide. So just quickly, in terms of the powers that the Constitution has bestowed on these legislative houses, the National Assembly has superseding powers over any of the states' houses of assembly. And this is provided for in the Constitution, Section 4.5. And that's superseding power. However, the Constitution also provides for the exclusive legislative list and the concurrent legislative lists. Now, in the exclusive list, these are the powers that are assigned to the National Assembly to the exclusion of any state House of Assembly. So these powers are limited and only to be exercised by the federal houses so Senate and House of Representatives. There are 68 items on that list, and includes citizenship, aviation, drugs and poison, which have been very contentious, and a host of others. While the concurrent legislative lists, this are the powers that are assigned both to the National Assembly and the state houses of assembly to make laws respectively. So here they make laws. There is supposed to be a cooperation of sorts in the way laws are made with the concurrent list. There are 12 items, electoral law, collection of taxes, things like that. But the one thing that must be stated is the state houses of assembly cannot make laws that supersede, that are in contradiction or contravene the laws or the acts passed by the National Assembly. So, for example, if the National Assembly has already passed an act, and this had passed a bill and has been assented to by the president, or it's become a national act, which is what laws at the federal level are called. They're called acts. And then at a state level, you have a rebellious state House of Assembly who feels the position or the interest of the state differ from the legislation that has been passed at the National Assembly, and they go and pass a law that now at the state is called a law as opposed to an act, and they pass a law that is at variance, maybe in some sections, with that of the National Assembly. The National Assembly Act will supersede that. Okay, so thank you. Next slide. So we have the powers, the functions of a legislator. So there are several, but they can be all put in under three. You have lawmaking, which is basically passing bills or laws, depending on the level. You have oversight functions, which is basically a function that is fundamental to the principle of separation of powers, because it's supposed to be a role. I think someone's complaining about the slides are really small. They can be sent afterwards if you need it. And some of the slides are similar to the ones in the notes as well. So if that helps. So oversight. Now, as I said, this is quite fundamental to the principle of separation of powers, which is basically the power that each arm of government serves as a check and balance on the other arm, and no one arm is supposed to be more powerful than the other. So this particular function is supposed to further that principle in theory, and in practice it's supposed to as well. We'll discuss further. Then the third, and to me the most important, is representation, because I think a legislator's primary role is to represent his or her constituency members, and the lawmaking and oversight and everything else will fall under that. How well you represent your people will be reflected in how you carry out these other functions. So we'll discuss in more detail, the three of them, as we go on. Please, the next slide. So now this theory or concept, it's called the boring revolution. And it means different things, but in this context, it could mean how we govern, or how our models of governing are perceived, or if they are still relevant. And I think, as just given the last couple of months in Nigeria, the election cycle coming and going, and just everything in general, I think it's important, and just the economy as well, how our government is structured. It's important for us to ask ourselves certain questions. We can learn about the different arms of government and the functions, and what the theory of governance is. But I think it's also important for us to start thinking and imagining what the ideal type of government would be for us. And it could be anything, really. And because I think, civilizations come and go, and the type of government that is perfect for them may differ. There isn't a one size fits all. And I may argue that our own current system of government is received. So it may not necessarily be the type of government that functions for our local environment, our local eccentricities. Nigerians, we always say we are unique people. So maybe our own government is supposed to be unique. And this is just thought, just food for thought as we go on and after the class, and as you continue with the rest of the classes as well. So these are some posers in line with what we just discussed. Our governance, I think that was an error. Are our governance models broken? Is the purpose of public service to support human freedom and flourishing? How do we create a decentralized and distributed democracy and legislative process? Now, when people say here decentralized, people think tech or maybe something more drastic. But in my thinking, is more localized. That word decentralized also means more localized, more closer to home, bringing it down to the people. So, and obviously distributed now means more across board, more inclusivity, more people who are the different aspects and forces of society, as opposed to just one size or one group. So please, the next slide. Sorry, please, the next slide. Thank you. So what is the boring revolution? It has been said that it is the urgent need for regulatory innovation, going back to the basics, rethinking and reimagining bureaucracy, governance, and the principles of democracy to create trust, which is highly required in Nigeria right now. Then democratizing the means of production and innovation in order to build towards a consciousness, a collective consciousness. The means of production and innovation would also involve the way our economy works, how we distribute income, how we distribute wealth, how we consider the circular economy, climate change, things like that. in how that impacts our environment and usually the most vulnerable people. And then we can incorporate this into policy, into legislation or amendment of existing legislation. And for those who are not in those offices, how we communicate with our leaders, what we demand of our leaders, what we expect of them. Then it's also democratizing capital, agency, knowledge, and then the vote. Because the reality, and I agree with this fundamentally, because capital is like the resources, agency is the ownership of the act of or acting, and the knowledge is the information, which, for example, this class, before we get to the vote, and before we get to the role everyone plays during that process, these three things are fundamental, because a lack of income, a lack of the basic resources affects the role people play at the time of the votes. Knowledge, same thing. So I think these are fundamental issues that we need to start thinking about as beyond what structures, existing structures are, what the system is. Systems are meant to be flexible and dynamic. So maybe we should start changing it if a system isn't working as we see it. No one is saying throw it. I've never been one to throw it away completely, because I think there are still positives and there are still uses within every system, but it's about how we adjust, how we adapt, how we evolve. And that's what the boring revolution is supposed to be about. Here's the next slide. So another quote, we are all they, we are the big civic they. I really like this quote because it reinforces that agency and that responsibility in every one of us. We tend to think, oh, they, as in the leaders or the politicians or the police or the government or whoever, they are the reason why. Or some people is even they, as in your parents or your family. We blame everyone else. But whether or not you like it, Nigeria is what it is because of the collective they, the we are the civic they. What happens during the election cycle happens during the 3 years between that time, happens in every unit. There's politics being played everywhere from all institutions, religious, academic, financial, nuclear, everywhere. And until we understand that there is a need for a collective repurposing or reimagination towards what we really want as a society, which even begs the question, what do we want? You know, there was a massive clamor for a new Nigeria, the change. But if we all sat down and said, okay, if we're like what age is it? 14-year-olds in school where you do comprehension, I said, okay, write an essay about what that Nigeria looks like. Put a picture to it. How many people would immediately have that answer? And how many of those answers will be similar? Because if the thing is, even if there is a change, after that moment of change, what comes next is what we need to start thinking about as well. Thank you. So now back to the legislature. So like those are things to think about, and as we are now talking about the specific roles of the legislators, we can incorporate those thinkings or those concepts and see how maybe they could be better performed within those contexts. So now the legislators' petri dish, that's basically not this. I don't know, playing around with something. You normally have. This is a tool used in science and physics labs, and in biology is where you culture cells, and it's supposed to be a clean, safe, uncontaminated space. And at the end of the day, it fosters the growth of bacteria or whatever is being cultured. So if we put the various roles and functions of a legislator into this fictional, massive dish, petri dish, what emerges is the question. What is being fostered? What grows out of it? So please, the next slide. So we actually, no, sorry, please, let's go back to that slide. Thank you. So if we take the first, the arrow of that's basically showing the process of making bills. So that's one of the functions, bill making of laws, and in this case, the process of passing a bill. In the notes, there was more detail about it, but as I said, in this class, which we're going to just discuss it. But using the notes, I will still go through it. The fact that you have the notes, at least I'm assuming you've gone through it, and even if you've not, you can go through it later, but I'll still quickly just run through it. So at least we have an understanding of what the functions are. So for passing a bill at the federal level, State House of Assembly. At the State House, there's only one house. So where in the federal level, there is a period which is that after the third reading, where there has to be some form of concurrence between the two houses, that won't exist. Once it has been passed by that house, then it goes for the assent by the governor. But there are also different types of bills. There are monetary bills, which is what we know as the appropriation bill. That's the budget, the annual budget of the country. And then there's the constitutional amendment bill as well. The sections were provided in the notes. The way these are passed are somewhat or slightly different from a general bill, but for the purpose of this class, we will go through how you pass a general bill. Within the sections that are provided, you can go, read about them in more detail. But at least from a general bill, that explains how majority of bills are passed. So first stage is the presentation and first reading. At this is a stage where the bill is introduced to the floor and the House clerk. So we use the federal house as the federal legislature as to narrate this. So let's say we start, the bill originated in the Senate. So a senator who will be the sponsor of the bill, and a bill is always sponsored by a senator, no matter where it comes, whether it comes from the executive or it comes from even a public interest group, like for example, the Not Too Young to Run bill, which was eventually passed. Those are examples of bills that do not necessarily emanate from the National Assembly or the legislature, but eventually, after all the preliminary steps are taken, it has to come through a legislator. So either a senator or a House of Reps member or a State House of Assembly member will sponsor the bill on the floor. So, after the clerk reads the short title of the bill, a date is set by rules and business for the second reading. At the second reading, now this is where the lead debate occurs, and the sponsor of the bill, so in this case, the senator, will argue the merits and demerits of the bill with the other senators. And then at this stage, the bill is either read, which now takes it to the third reading, or it's defeated. At this stage, that's the end of it. The senator has to go and start the process all over again. If the bill is read for the second time here, so if it successfully goes through and is read for the second time, it is referred to a committee and to the committee stage, unless a decision is made that the bill should be heard by the whole House, and there are certain bills like this. Now, at the committee stage, every bill will be referred to a committee, and it's the committee that oversees the functions of the MDA or, or the area relating to the bill. So for example, if it's a bill regarding education, it would be referred to Committee on Education. If it's a bill on healthcare, it will be referred to such a committee. Now, if it's a bill that has to do with maybe two overlapping committees, then a joint committee will be set up. So another committee will be set up for that purpose, which will have senators or members from both committees who will go over the bill at this stage. So at this stage, they'll consider the bill further based on all the arguments that were already put forward in the second reading. They'll go more in depth, look more in depth into the bill. And at this stage, they also call for public hearings if needed. Now, this is where if there are specific things that relates to the interests, different interest groups of the public as a whole, they would be called to speak to the issues. We had when the petroleum bill was being passed, or even the finance bill was being passed, there were several interest groups that were called in the various oil sector, the oil industry, the power sector, the financial sector, based on the type of bill or the area referred to in the bill. Certain groups will be called to speak to those issues and put forward their cases for or against the bill. After all of this, the bill may be approved without any changes. It might be rewritten completely, it might be amended slightly, or completely blocked. But once all of that is done, a report is presented on the floor of the whole House of the Senate, and the sponsor of the bill will move a motion that the bill should be read a third time. A third time. Once this is done, once it's the motion is moved and passes, that's it done on the floor of the Senate. A clean, signed, and endorsed copy by the Senate President is sent by the clerk of that chamber, so of the Senate, to the clerk of the House of Representatives. And this would be asking, okay, we've passed this bill, we need you to concur, hence the concurrence element of it, so that we can send a final copy through the National Assembly as one body to the President for his assent. Now, at this stage, the process goes through the same thing in the second House, so the House of Representatives, first stage, first reading, second, blah, blah, blah. Then once all of that is done, if there is a concurrence, so if they agree, that clerk, so the House of Reps clerk, will retain the bill and send a message back to the Senate saying, hey, we, obviously not as casually as this, it's properly done as written documents and blah, blah, blah. But, hey, we concur, all is well. Then it gets sent to the clerk of the National Assembly to proceed to the President. But if there is some dissenting argument, so there's no concurrence between the two, a harmonization, a conference/harmonization committee in this case. Now, if it's if it's a monetary bill, there are some differences already, but this particular stage, that conference committee will be called a finance committee. Now, so this joint conference committee is made up of the two houses, so senators and House of Rep members. And their basic role here is to address the differences that have been raised in the bill and propose, at least come up with a single position and present that to both houses all over again, because they have to adopt it, both houses. So they have to come up with a single position, either changing some things, but this is only to discuss the issues that raised the dissent, so the non-concurrence. So there may be some sections of the bill, specific sections of the bill that are not, the two houses came up with different things, and it's only that they will have to address. They cannot go back and start amending or looking at other sections that are the same, because one, that's a waste of time, and two, it's not how it's done according to the rules, but just logically, it doesn't make sense to do all of that all over again. Then once they come up with a single position and basically the bill is the same, it has to run through plenary once more and be adopted at plenary in both chambers. Once all of that is done and there is a bill, a clean copy of that bill is sent by the clerk of the National Assembly, not the clerk of a house, to the president for his presidential assent or her presidential assent whenever that happens. If the bill is rejected, or if the president assents to the bill, yeah, we have a new act, or if the governor assents to the bill, yeah, we have a new law. But if the bill is rejected, or or the president doesn't respond at all, and there's no communication to the National Assembly, or the governor doesn't communicate to the State House of Assembly, within 30 days of receiving that bill, the National Assembly has the power to veto that rejection of the presidential veto by a 2/3 majority vote. And once that is done, the bill becomes an act. But it's not an ideal situation. Please. So then we also have on the other side, you have the oversight functions put in that dish as well. Now, this, as I said, is fundamentally, this is supposed to fundamentally further the principles of separation of powers. And because here, the National Assembly and State House of Assembly have very clear powers to oversee various aspects of government and public officers. They have the investigative powers, the evidential powers, power of the purse, then they have the power to impeach, confirm, and remove the president, vice president, governors. They have the power to confirm ministers. They have the power to even confirm or remove judicial officers. In terms of the investigative powers, these are powers that are so they can, as the word states, they can investigate the activities of MDAs or public officers who are supposed to be executing or carrying out the administration of laws or acts, or also disbursing funds that have been appropriated by the National Assembly. So heads of MDAs, all of them. I mean, we've seen this happen several times where heads of MDAs are called to National Assembly and are questioned, and it's a big public thing. Whatever the outcome is, that's another conversation. They can also investigate the conduct of executive officials, and the evidential power is basically a power to gather evidence. So usually in the course of their investigation, they will need to gather evidence. So they can summon any person in Nigeria to give evidence on a matter. And if the person doesn't respond, they can also have a warrant issued to compel such a person to attend. And power of the purse, as we saw, there's something called the Appropriations Bill, which comes from the executive arm of government. So either the presidency or the government house, and these are supposed to go through a lot of rigorous investigation in the course of the bill passing process, as we saw. And they can also audit public accounts. They can and I said obviously they can impeach and confirm the removal of several public officers in the executive and other arms of government. Please, the next slide. So that's just quickly running through the functions. And like I said, the final function, which I think is the all-encompassing function, is that of representation, because here they can listen to the concerns and opinions of their constituents. They can articulate and advocate for the views of their constituency members, concerns, and their needs in order to address and resolve these concerns through legislation, motions, and oversight. They can also oversee and scrutinize the performance of the executive in implementing projects, utilizing public funds, and the execution of the law, as we just discussed. So this is basically the function where all their other functions are exercised, at least through which all the other functions should be exercised, because this is what they are there for. They are representatives of the people who put them there. Please, the next slide. So, another quote: "Our future cannot be made by burning the red tape, but instead by making it agile and evolving it in all senses to make it fit for purpose." This, I'm going back to the whole conversation about the boring revolution. If we are to, throw away the system as it is now, we've discussed the legislative arm of government, we've spoken about its composition, the powers that are given to you by the Constitution, given to you by the Constitution, and etc., etc. If we say, okay, we're tired of this, we want to throw away everything, we go back to Constitution, somehow successfully amend the Constitution, or even say you don't want to have a Constitution at all, no, we're just speaking, then what would we have? Like, what would be the alternative? I think these are things we should be discussing as well. Thank you. Next slide. And that's if that's what you want, if that's what you think is best for Nigeria. But if you don't think, oh, let's be very extreme about it. No, let's take a step back and try to be more flexible in our thinking and think more evolution as opposed to just completely obliterating the system that is there. Then maybe we can build on that. Now, this is a conversation from my own side. Obviously, I'm open to a conversation about it, but I think my role here is, in addition to talking through this arm of government, its composition, the constitutional powers, the functions, I think it's also good for us to think through what an ideal legislature looks like, what an ideal form of representation looks like, what we as citizens of Nigeria will be happy with if we were to say, oh, this is how I'm represented in terms of my the laws that guide my activities, that guide my business, that guide the education I get or my children get, that guides the healthcare that's available to me and my parents and my children. That guides the laws that dictate how I can buy, sell, own, rent landed property, things like that. So the reality is, Nigeria is literally at the edge of a cliff. It's a fact. Not to be pessimistic, but we all know that. And there is a tip in every civilization, in every country, globally right now, we're at a tipping point. And there are a lot of things that have come together to create that tipping point, whether it's inequality, just the sheer growth of inequality, the impact of climate change, this mad grow and push in technology that is just accelerating at unprecedented speed. And with that in mind, what does the legislative and regulatory framework that will work to either ease some of those pressures so we don't completely tip over, or to work on what is already working? Now, before, this is the first class that this particular slide looks like this. Normally, it's just the McDonald's sign with color, and the Chicken Republic sign. But the truth is, after the last few months, I think we need to start reimagining what it is, which is what I think the head of this particular section is, the reimagination of what it is like. We can complain about the problem and we can say we want a complete change, but what is that going to look like? What will work for us? Because we can change. For example, just, we're having a conversation. In history has shown us that a lot of times when a society is on the brink and there is almost a tipping point, that rush for change leads to something even worse. Sorry to do that. You can have I'm still on that page. Sorry. You can have a coup which would work for some, would not work for some. You can have it's still a version of democracy, but it's mixed with maybe some form of authoritarianism, or it's still, there's so many things. And I believe, like I said at the beginning, Nigeria received its system of government. It's changed in a way, but I think that gives us the opportunity, the right, and the power to reframe it how we want, so it works for us. So our legislative arm of government works for us. Yes, we are not legislators, so we're not going to go there and change it in one day. But in every court, now there's so many groups of people, clusters all over the world that are thinking, how can the systems work for me? How can the systems work for us as a group of people? So if we've discussed the legislative arm of government, now the question is this the legislative arm of government that we want? Is it working for us as is? What type of changes do we need? Do we need a smaller legislative arm of government? Maybe would that representation be more effective? Do we want a bigger legislative arm of government? Maybe we want more chambers. Maybe we want more representatives within the chambers. Maybe they will represent us more if we have fewer people per legislator. That is a complete argument, because then we need to think about the costs. But we are thinking here. Or do you want to turn it upside down and just change it? Maybe it's not even that the legislators are there. Maybe all of us will be our own legislators, and we just have a building where we go to and we argue our cases, and we have maybe 3 adjudicators who say, okay, yeah, this is how we will move, this is the type of policy we will have, this type of legislation we'll have. Or do we want something that maybe speaks to every facet of society, every interest group of society? Maybe it's a proper reflection of every single person in society. And this is reflected in the type of legislators we have. So every minority feels represented. Women feel represented. People living with disabilities feel represented. Ethnic minorities feel represented. Every group feels represented, because we can see a reflection of ourselves there. And because of that, they know we are holding them to account to represent us. Or, like I asked earlier, do we want something completely different? So instead of McDonald's, maybe we want Chicken Republic. That's a question. And if you even think about that, also brings the issue of a more local type of legislative arm of government, because whether or not you like it, before colonialism and all that we received, we were functioning in whatever way you want to see, to say history has been rewritten for us. So there was a society that functioned, which made it slightly difficult for colonialism to take hold in some places, and even the places that it did take hold over, there was a struggle. So clearly there was a functional system, whether it was a democracy or oligarchy or something, but there was a system. So maybe we speak to the historians and we understand what could best work for us in terms of representation. So food for thought. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we can also think of the powers, and with that in mind, the Constitution as is has provided some, I guess you can call it protections, some allowances there is a provision for us as citizens in this Nigeria, in this legislative system, to exercise our constitutional rights over how we are represented, who represents us, and even if we want to be the ones who represent people. We can participate during the election cycle. We can also be representatives, so either run for office and win, or be involved in the political party system if we want. And we also have the power to recall existing legislators in our constituencies at both levels. There is a process for this in the Constitution under Section 69 and 110. And it's basically that if a group of registered voters or a constituency is dissatisfied with the way their legislator is representing them, if he or she is doing it poorly, before the next election cycle, you have the power to, if more than half of the registered voters in that constituency come together and sign a petition against that legislator and submit it to the chairman, submit it to INEC, present it to INEC, the INEC chairman, and they have to, this petition will be expressing that they have lost confidence in their legislator. Once this is done, INEC will have to obviously verify those signatures and make sure each signature is attached or is for a relevant registered voter within that constituency. Once that verification process is done, INEC would then hold a referendum 90 days, within 90 days of the date of that petition, in order to ensure that there is an approval within that constituency based on a simple majority of registered voters. So once there's a simple majority of registered voters in that constituency, then the petition flies. Now, obviously, certain processes will need to be, administrative processes will have to be conducted. They will inform the legislator, he will respond, blah, blah, blah. But once all of that is done, and once those 90 days have come, and that petition, that referendum is held, and there's a simple majority, the legislator is recalled. Now, in reality, how successful this can be and has been in the past, it's when there are so many competing interests and there's a lot of power play, successfully removing a legislator becomes an uphill battle. When even half of the registered voters or half of the constituency don't even know that power exists, to start convincing people becomes an issue. When there is a massive trust deficit in the government or in the governance structure as is, to convince people to go through this becomes a rigorous process, because a lot of people will say, if I put my name there, they will know I did this. And it makes you think about, again, if this system is really functional for who we are as a people, or whether we need to tweak it slightly or change it completely, as the last slide showed. Please, okay, we're already there. So, with everything we've discussed, with everything that's going on in Nigeria, I felt this class was an opportunity to just both talk and teach about the legislative arm of government, but also discuss what type of government we would like, what type of legislative arm of government we would like, what type of representation we feel we deserve, and if the system as is best, or if there are other ways we can achieve this democracy we really say we live in or we want. And it's supposed to provoke thought. And as I said, we all know what to do. We can decide the role we want to play in the future of Nigeria. Everybody's at that stage now. We're all deciding what we want to do, and that is a fair and personal choice. But then after that, if you decide, okay, I want to stay in Nigeria, I want to do what I can to fix Nigeria or help in the evolution of this country in whatever way, I think it is important to join a collective because, and there are different types of collectives. This is a collective, Electoral College. In our local communities, there are collectives. There's even a political party is a collective. You can join a pressure group. You can join there's Rotary Club, there's Lions Club. I mean, I'm giving examples of if none of them suit what you want, you can create one. But the point I'm making is there needs to be a continuous discourse about what is best and what suits our society. Because once we figure something out, then we can start working towards implementing it. And the reality is it doesn't really change at the top unless it changes at the bottom or it changes at the local level. And that's what that decentralization is really about. Everything needs to become localized. We need to think in our own small community. We need to talk about, okay, what's best for us as this local government, or what's best for us as this street? What's best for us in this house? What's best for us in this group we are in? Maybe you form a collective of your own. And then this is how evolutions and the boring revolution, for example, will be born, because it will not just be about government. You will find it will be translated into how we share wealth, how we think about innovation, how we think about climate change and the circular economy, and how we think about growth. And if that is even it, if we should be growing, maybe we should be thinking about how we thrive as opposed to how we grow. These are all thoughts, and I probably can keep going, but just to say, get active in your local politics, join a political party, identify your representatives and hold them to account, because, I mean, that's what they're there for. Then let's reimagine governance and government and what civic participation is really about. Thank you. I think there's another slide. Yes. So now, as we started, we will end. I'll leave you with this quote. There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it will be a butterfly. Things may seem a certain way right now, and this class may have, I hope not, just added more confusion to the situation. But I think in everything there needs to be a crunch, and it forces people out of anger and rage, or out of hopelessness, or just dissatisfaction. We maybe begin to reimagine what will be better for us, because I don't know if anyone here is a gamer, but I am, and there is this thing called, in most games, like if you have a city building or city developing game like Anno or SimCity, there's a part of it that is called sandbox. So you can go to sandbox mode instead of, because most times the main game has certain quests and challenges, and you have to do all those things. If you don't do them right, you will fail the game. But in sandbox mode, you have the liberty of playing around with things, testing, trying it out. I think we need to introduce that to the way we lead, the way we govern, the way we operate as a society. A lot of things, you find answers through trial and error, you find answers through thinking. If something fails the first time, it shouldn't be the end. It shouldn't be, oh, okay, it's over, that's it, bye-bye. No, it should be, okay, what went wrong? What could we have done right? And I think it's also revealing, because it shows us our reveal response. And by that, I mean, take, for example, in 2008 globally, after when there was the economic crisis, everybody was saying, no, we need to change the way the world works. We need to change economics. There needs to be more equity. I mean, look at where we are now in 2023. I don't think the world could be more divided. The world could be more unequal. Inequality has skyrocketed. Climate change is on our heads. Then if you look at 2020, now in local context, we had the NSAS protest. In that moment, everybody was like, oh, new Nigeria, yes, power, yes, we are taking over, we are this, 2023 is going to be the future. And then what happened? Now, this election has come and gone. What is going to be our reveal response? How are we going to respond to that? You know, in the heat of it, yes, there are sentiments, there are actions, there's a certain feeling of, oh, this is it. But then if it doesn't go the way we think, or even if it does go the way we want it to, or we wanted it to, you know, that's not what this class is about. The question is, what next? What's the reveal response? Which is why I feel and I felt this class needs to be more, if you please go to the last slide, proactively hopeful. So I will leave you with that. Thank you for listening to me. And if you have any questions or you want to, you know, you have an opinion, I'm very open to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nala. We had a good lecture. Thank you for educating us on the legislative, and we hope Nigeria does better. We all individuals owe it to ourselves to strive for more and not just say things, but act on the things that we say. Thank you so much for the insightful lecture. If we all do have questions, can you please state them down below in the chat box, and we would either unmute your mic and you can ask your questions, or we can read your chats. So if you do have some questions, please indicate by a raise a hand and your questions will be answered. If you have questions, please state your questions down below. That way.
I think some people have their hands raised. Anita.
Okay. Sure. Please mute.
You have to unmute them.
Hold on, please. Okay. Benjamin has a question. Your mic is going to be on mute now. Please ask your question. Please hold.
All right. Good evening. Thank you so much for this session. You did justice to at least what we know as the legislative arm of government. My question is this. You mentioned that the National Assembly, consisting of the red and the green chamber, have oversight functions. Now, this oversight function covers both the executive and the judiciary, I want to assume. If the answer to this is yes, to what extent would you say that the oversight functions of the legislative arm of government on the judiciary or the executive is not needed? That is, does it have a slam? Do they have a limit, you know, in carrying out oversight functions? Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your question. Yes, they have a limit. I mean, if their powers are arbitrary, then they will basically become unstoppable. They can easily dismiss a judiciary officer, for example, or it would then defy what the oversight functions are for, which is to ensure some form of level playing field and serve as a check and balance on the other. So, for example, in relation to the judicial arm of government, the legislative arm has powers to confirm and remove, but these are based on recommendations by the executive as well. So a lot of the time, some of those types of functions, whether it's impeachment or confirmation, they tend to work in tandem with the other arm. Then even in terms of legislation, the executive arm of government, the legislative arm of government cannot pass a law that takes away the powers of the judiciary. This is a constitutional limitation. Because you can have a legislative arm of government that wants to be, I don't know, the judge and the lawmaker and all of that all in one as a body, and that will be a massive problem, especially in this type of country we're already living. So that is those are like two examples of where those limitations are and where those limitations exist. But in other respects, yes, there are limitations. They are not supposed to. I mean, even I think in anything, even a small power can be what's the word? Overused, and it happens. But as far as the regulatory framework is concerned, or has been provided, as I've given two examples, there are limitations. Now it's also on a duty on the other arms of government to ensure proper checks on the legislative arm as well. So, for example, the judiciary should provide proper checks on the legislative arm. So in a situation where there is a law, even the Electoral Act, for example, the judiciary's role right now is to ensure that those acts are properly interpreted in relation to the law, in relation to the Constitution, and also in the interest of the people, so that these things are not just for the whims of those who are in positions to frame and design them. But reality, so another conversation. I hope that answers your question. But yes, there are limitations, and there should be limitations, because that's what separation of powers is about.
Thank you. I do hope that answers your question. Moses has a question. I am going to unmute your mic. You can ask your question, please. Please hold. You can ask your question, Moses.
Okay, good evening. Ms. Leonard, thank you so much for the insightful information you've shared with us this evening. I have a couple of questions quickly. So my first question is this. Can you just walk us through the process that is required by the public? So let's say, for instance, a people of a particular constituency want their member to sponsor a bill. Can you just walk us through the process? What do they need to do? And then my second question is, typically, how long does it take, or how long does it require for bills to be passed? And then my final question is this, from an expert perspective, do you think we need two national houses of assemblies in this country? Thank you.
Well, hi, Moses. Thank you for your questions. I think I've already forgotten one, but if I'll answer as I remember, then you can remind me of the one that if I left it out. So yeah, your first question was sorry, can you remind me? Sorry, I think I forgot. Sorry, Moses, could you just remind me your question?
Okay. The first question is this. I said, what is the process required by the public to request their member to sponsor a bill? Should I take them one by one or just run through the three questions again?
No, you can see all of them. Then I'm just noting them, so I'll answer.
Okay. Then the second question is, I said, how long does it take typically for a bill to be passed? And then the final question is, do you think, as an expert now, do you think we need two national assemblies in this country?
Okay, thank you. That was just a moment of brain freeze. Yeah, so your first question, the process of public getting a bill passed or a bill sponsored. If you have a public interest group, for example, or a people in a constituency who think a certain bill will be in the interest of their constituency, you would normally have, the reality is the truth of the matter is anyone who find it difficult to walk in to a legislator's office and say, hey, pass this bill. There would have to be a lot of research and a lot of lobbying that will go into it, because you will need to convince the sponsor of the bill that it will be good in the interest of the public. It will be good because it can't just be to the benefit of one community, especially if it's a national bill. It has other senators, other House of Reps members have to see the benefits of that bill, because as you remember, during the second reading, there's going to be a lot of debate about it. So, for example, that like we saw with the Not Too Young to Run Act, but let's just say a group of people, an interest group maybe feels a certain legislation should be passed in relation to climate change. They would take that, they on their own will need to do some research and articulation and come up with a framework of, they could easily develop the bill and present it to their legislator, or because it may not necessarily be a legislator in their constituency. It could be a legislator who shows an interest in climate change. I personally would even advise that more than the legislator in your constituency, unless your legislator is also familiar or has an interest or has a broad appreciation for climate change issues. So you find and that's what like lobbying is about. You will need to find someone who understands it. So you've already jumped over the first hurdle, because it will pique the person's interest. So you present it to the legislator. Once that is done, as I said, that group cannot go and present it on the floor. So it will be. I don't know if you can still hear me. I think I got cut off. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I got cut off. Yeah, so once that is done, the legislator would get at least a general consensus or feeling of all the other legislators in that house. So other senators, sometimes that's why you have co-sponsors. And the reality is the more co-sponsors, the easier it is to jump the hurdle of passing it, because there can be a lot of contention in relation to if the bill will serve their interest or the interest of their people, or whatever political conversations they are having. But once all of that is done and the bill is moved, at that committee stage, that's another place where that interest group will come in. they will be following the legislature throughout the process, even the lead debates where they debate the merits and demerits, the interest group or the group or whoever would, but usually that group has to be led by someone who has some form of political understanding, and that's just the reality, because the hurdles that would have to be jumped are a lot. So, or at least is somehow familiar with the chosen legislator. These are just the facts. Once that is done, at that committee stage, the public interest group or groups or individuals, whoever the ones that sort of brought that bill forward, that's an opportunity for them to be invited to argue on the merits of the case. So they would have at least probably paid a lot of attention to the journey of the bill, especially at that second reading. And this would be an opportunity to debunk some of those doubts and concerns. So once after that stage, the rest of it is back to the House. They may be, when it goes to the other House, they may also be invited there to speak, and it may be wise to also have some legislators who are interested or who see the merits of this bill before it gets there as well, so that, because at the end of the end game is to pass or get that legislation passed into an act or a law. I hope that answers your question, but that's how the public through a public interest group or a group of people can bring a legislation to the National Assembly or House of Assembly.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, no, there were two other, sorry, I forgot. He had two other questions. The chambers aspect, do I think there should be only one chamber? I think the National Assembly can be better administered in terms of costs. However, I understand and I see why we need two chambers. Nigeria is a very is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, varying interest country. We're large, over 200 million people, estimated to be 500 in 2030. So we're growing, we're constantly growing. It's going to be difficult to argue for the reduction. However, because even in terms of the provision of the two houses, as I said, one is there to represent equality across the states. Some states are very large. So if we only had, for example, a House of Representatives, some states will have more people representing them than others. And trust me, the same people who are saying we should have fewer houses will come and say, I don't feel represented. Why is that state having more House of Rep members than me? Why are they any better than us? It's because they are this, it's because they are that. All of that, things like that to start. Or if you say, we only have a Senate, again, some states are larger than others. Some, they will say, wow, but why are we all having three? We deserve more. We are not being represented fairly. Some of us are being marginalized because there are only three, and these three people are not from my area. So that's what, at least, the reasoning behind, at least that's one of the reasonings behind the two houses. Obviously, it also allows for more deliberation and clarity in terms of the journey. The reality of all of that is now a different conversation, but I see the reason, I see the logic behind two houses personally, but it could be administered way better than it's currently being done in terms of costs. Severe reduction, but that's another argument. Now the last one you said is time for passing a bill. There's no fixed time, because at the end of the day, what you want is an effective and efficient bill and a relevant bill, as opposed to a speedy, quick, very fast bill. But yes, bills sometimes take like years to get through. So that now there should be a better administration of that. Senators, National Assembly members and State House Assembly members should sit more, should sit for longer, should actually deliberate and go through this thing, because it can be done. What they take maybe 5 years to do could be done a lot quicker. What they take a year to do could be done a lot quicker. But to put a marker on it could be counterintuitive in the long run. So I think that answers your 3 questions.
Thank you. Emeka has a question. Emeka, you can ask your question, please.
All right, good evening, Ma. Thank you so much for the insightful lecture. Please, I just want to, I want you to clarify something for me. Considering that the National Assembly has both the Senate and the House of Reps, I don't know, are there any duties that the House of Reps or any specific roles that they play independent of the Senate? And then the second question is, in a situation where the president fails to assent or ignores a bill that has been submitted for assent for over 30 days. Now, for the 2/3 that are required to override that presidential veto power, do they have to come from the National Assembly as a whole or from just the Senate? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I'll answer it backwards. The last one, yes, is the National Assembly. So the two houses, it has to go back to plenary from the 2 houses, and not just 1 house. In terms of your first question, in terms of if there are any specific rules, I think, as I said earlier, I think it's more about the representation of it than, oh, this house maybe is here to look at this part of the government, while this is to look at the parts of the government. They both have mirror, like for example, committee-wise, they have mirroring committees. But the difference with the House of Reps, there are 360 as opposed to 109. So their spread is wider. The membership and the things they can do in terms of by their share number is a lot more. But they both have the powers to pass bills, so a bill can emanate from either house, but it still has to go to the other house. But as I said before, the difference really is that in such an instance, a legislator from the Senate will probably be looking at that bill, or in an ideal situation, will be looking at that bill from the position of my state, and will maybe work in concert with the other senators from that state, because is this in the interest of my state? Obviously, yes, they'll also look at it from the point of their senatorial district. But the reason why, that's just 1 senatorial district out of 3. So they'll be looking at, oh, my senatorial district, which, for example, in my state, my own senatorial district is covered by, includes 7 local governments. But now in the House of Reps, my federal constituency has 3 local governments, which is even an anomaly in my state, because there are actually 2 federal constituencies per House of Rep member, except mine. So in another situation, if a bill is being moved, you think of it from this point of view, is a House of Reps member is considering this in relation to 2 local governments as opposed to 7. So it's supposed to bring them closer to the people. And I think for me, that's their primary function, representation. Someone can have a different position, that's fine. That's, like I said, that's the beauty of having a sandbox. It's conversation, it's trial and error. But that is my own position about it. I think the functions that differ are in the representation and how they exercise that representation. That's how it's supposed to be. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Mark Fred has a question. Mark Fred, can you please ask your question?
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for the insightful teaching and expository also. It was more of education for me. Okay, I just have a clarification to make based on what you said about the State House of Assemblies, not as maybe making a law that we override what has already been made by the federal house. So I want to paint a scenario. I happen to stay in the north for a while, and most of the northern states, they don't really operate our conventional laws like in the constitution. They go more with their Sharia laws and the rest. So, and for someone that is staying there that is not actually a northerner, but the person in a way is compelled to obey those laws, which obviously is not the general law from the federal House of Assembly. So how can one navigate through that process and juxtapose it also why the federal laws are there and the states assemblies are operating a different kind of law? I hope you understood the question. Thank you so much.
Hi. Sorry, I think I didn't hear everything. Could you just quickly restate your question? I heard Sharia law and the difference, but I didn't hear everything. Could you just quickly say it again? Thank you.
Okay, I think maybe she's got network issues. Please give her a second. Okay.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, I said I didn't hear everything. Sorry, I got cut off again. Oh, I don't know if it was me, but I couldn't hear everything that was asked. So is it possible to just quickly ask it again?
Okay, ma. Okay, let me rephrase the question. Am I being heard now?
Yes, I
can hear me. Okay, so I was asking, based on your initial statement on the state House of Assemblies not being able to override laws or acts that's been done at the federal level. So I'm painting the scenario that I happen to stay in the north for a while, and most of the northern states actually operate with a law also that is not applicable to other states. And one of them is the Sharia law. And it's been assumed that if you are staying there, you are compelled to adhere to those laws. So how can one, like, if for someone like me that is not actually a northerner, and I'm staying there and I'm being compelled to obey a law that overrides what the federal House of Assemblies are doing? So how will I be able to navigate on that process? Or is it a misnomer also in the part of them? And how can it also be corrected also in Jews? So it's just different tell of the questions also. So I hope you understood it now.
Yeah, I did. Thank you for that. I got what you're asking. So in terms of Sharia law, then we would start discussing the different because then you'll be calling it in terms of interpretation, so you'd have to go into the court. But as far as National Assembly is concerned and the legislative arm of government is concerned, if a law is or emanates from those 68 items that were listed on the federal exclusive legislative list, that law or that area is specific to the federal the National Assembly, not any state level lawmaking. I mean, there's the State House of Assembly, because it would emanate from a House of Assembly, but in relation to the type of law that is practiced in that area. So the custom, so either Sharia or even in some areas custom, because that's why there are certain items that are provided to the state level, because that also is supposed to take into consideration the local flavor of things. However, certain areas like those items in those 68 items, they are to the exclusion of the National Assembly, because those are, for example, arms and aviation. You can't really say, oh, there is a specific Sharia law relating to arms and aviation. It will be, the National Assembly will override that, because these are items specific to the National Assembly. Now, in relation to, if it's now at a state level, then that's where you will now get the courts maybe to interpret the jurisdiction, if they are courts of competent jurisdiction, or there comes out maybe it's Sharia court as opposed to State House of Assembly, and then, oh, how do we interpret, sorry, not as opposed to, if that's where you now get the jurisdictional side of it, in terms of which law or which Sharia law would you follow. But as far as it's something in those 68 items, it's to the jurisdiction, it's to the exclusion of the federal house, federal legislature. Those 12 items, yes, you can debate it, but the 68 items, you can't. It will cause an uproar most likely, but the federal legislative arm of government will have something to say about it. So I hope that clarifies it. You know, there are issues that are different when it's not a matter of getting the courts involved to interpret jurisdiction and things like that. But when it comes to this, it will be, and those are where the law emanates from arguably equal stations. But once it's the National Assembly and it's those 68 items that the Constitution has provided for, it will be very difficult to argue it or to touch it. It's impossible to touch it, but you know, one might try to argue it in favor of Sharia law, but I don't see that flying. If such a situation has happened, please, I would be happy to hear about it, at least. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. So no, the federal arm of government supersedes, the National Assembly supersedes on those 68 items. If it's in contravention, then it is not right. Thank you. I hope you heard me. Or I hope you can hear me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for today. I had a very insightful lecture. I'm pretty sure that we all did. I'm very grateful for the impactful knowledge you've given us. And we hope that everything that we have learned, we will go back and think about them and see how we can implement these things that we've been taught in an actual sense. With that being said, can we all just say thank you so much to Nella? With the raise of hands or your mics might be mute, I will have to mute everyone's mic. But
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Insightful lecture.
Many times, man. Many times.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
just to appreciate her knowledge, please
Thank you.
say thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
very much.
you. Thank you. Good night.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. And we look forward to another lecture tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nella. An insightful class as usual. Thank you, Anita. Great moderation. And well done, everyone, for joining the class. You submitted your assignments yesterday, and I'm sure you've seen your results. So campaigns will start on Sunday. You've gotten your candidates, so get ready for campaigns by Sunday evening. All right. Good night, everyone. See you tomorrow in class.